That's right. It is lessons of love, life lessons today on Orange and Blue Today. Cecil Lammey, Andrew Mason. We're all about the love, Mace. We love football.
Yeah, all about loving football, loving sports, loving our fellow human beings.
Loving each other.
Yes, loving. I was going to say loving watching the weekend of playoffs, but it wasn't a great vintage football weekend,
Yeah.
Only really had one close game of the ones that were played this weekend, right? So, it was all right. But hoping for some more competitive games this weekend. But yes, there are plenty of lessons of love that can be applied to what the Broncos might do going forward.
Yes, and that's why we're here to talk about it. So what is that primary lessons? And Mace, why is it patience? With the Packers, you see it with Jordan Love. The Broncos are likely to get a rookie quarterback, we believe. Maybe patience is the best plan for that young man.
Okay, here's the thing. You have to be prepared to be patient, right? Now, if a young quarterback shows that he's ready to step in earlier, you don't want to hesitate on that. You want to go ahead and get that clock started, especially because we're talking about the value of that quarterback being cost controlled on his first contract. So you have to be prepared to be patient. However, be flexible enough to say, okay, if this quarterback isn't ready but is making strides, we can do other things. And that's why getting the right bridge, if you have a young quarterback, is vitally important, because if you're having a pretty good season, you're competitive, and it doesn't do you any favors to put a young quarterback out there early, at least you can put yourself in a position to be patient. Whereas, I don't think Jarrett Stidham is that level of bridge that would allow you to be patient with someone that you might draft.
Well, and that's why I said over Stidham's last two games, Mace, they don't need one quarterback, they need two.
Yeah.
We'll see how that construct goes, but I know everyone's sick of losing. They're sick of missing the playoffs. But if you could say, hey, in a couple, 3 years, you're going to have the guy that's going to take over your franchise, I think we'd all be happy with that. Still frustrated, though, from the, win now of this league.
Exactly. I mean, I will say this. Sometimes and then you have to kind of stop going down the road. You don't want to fall victim to sunk cost fallacy, right? I would argue, for example, Paxton Lynch, because he had a couple of shots. I mean, he obviously started briefly in his rookie season, but then they gave him the off season of 2017 to reset. They gave him time behind Trevor Siemian, and when he went back out there again, he didn't look any better unless he was running a simplified offense like he did in that season finale of 2017 against Kansas City.
Right.
So it's one of those things where it's not one size fits all in terms of how you handle it. And again, some young quarterbacks are ready. CJ Stroud was ready. That's a really good example of that. But old school Bronco fans probably can recall John Elway as a rookie not being completely ready when he got thrown out there early in the season. Later on, had learned a few things, led that comeback against Baltimore that got the Broncos in the playoffs there in 1983. At that point, he was basically ready, but early in the season, he was not. You have to be prepared for that readiness to come anytime from week one of the rookie season to the case with Jordan Love, maybe not until the fourth year. Although I think realistically, if they turn to Love in 2022, Cease, I think they would have ended up getting similar results to what they're getting right now.
Right. And a guy that we saw down at the Senior Bowl. I remember Jordan Love there because Justin Herbert was there. Jalen Hurts was there. And also there were days Steven Montez looked better than Jalen Hurts. And he looked better than Jordan Love. Jordan Love was a disappointment that week, but you saw the raw physical tools. It's easy to see, Mace. But that team, and credit to the Packers for taking that time and kind of waiting it out, waiting for the right time, not putting that young man out there too soon, because that can ruin a quarterback. And we're seeing with Love, their plan was the right plan. And again, every plan's an individual one.
And it's also an organizational philosophy of the Packers, right? to keep on swinging at quarterback. There's a pretty straight line going from Ron Wolf, who became the general manager in the early 1990s, of course, a Hall of Famer, to Ted Thompson, to Brian Gutekunst today. Philosophically, there are a lot of common threads in the DNA. One of the common threads is always be looking at quarterback even when you have the guy. Goes back to the 1990s. They had Brett Favre, who was on his way to the Hall of Fame, but they still kept bringing in Matt Hasselbeck, even Kurt Warner for a little bit, Ty Detmer, Mark Brunell, Aaron Brooks, and they were able to trade the surplus, right?
Right.
They draft Aaron Rodgers in 2005. Turns out Brett Favre still has 3 years left, right? They draft Jordan Love in 2020. Aaron Rodgers had 3 more seasons left, including 2 of them in which he was the MVP. But they were always looking over the horizon, and they understood the importance of the quarterback position and the notion that you can't really be too well stocked at quarterback, right? You can't be overstocked there. Because if you have a surplus, you trade the surplus and get back something. I mean, hey, the Packers trade Aaron Rodgers, got back a nice little haul, although they would have gotten back more if they traded him a year earlier, right?
Right. If they hadn't gotten cold feet 2 years before that as well. So, and
he might have been a Bronco, right?
Well, I've heard you say this, Mace, like the surplus you'll get in return. Let's say you draft a 7th round guy and he's okay, or he shows some flashes. You're going to get more than a 7th rounder in return because it's a quarterback desperate league. We had 60 quarterbacks start this year. And I think that's just a great philosophy to have if you're the Denver Broncos, and like find your guy, but then find the next guy, because you mentioned Rodgers and Love. Like Rodgers, we have to remember too. I want to go back to this. When he came out of Cal, remember he was a Tedford quarterback.
Yep.
It was almost like a sin to say that you were a Jeff Tedford quarterback. And he's the only QB, Mace, that I've ever seen get over seeing ghosts. When he was at Cal, he saw ghosts. When he got to the pros, he saw Brett Favre, who didn't even know what like a nickel defense was. And Rodgers kind of learned from that. I ain't afraid of no ghosts. And then he became the Aaron Rodgers that we know of yesteryear, not today. He's different today, but still, like, so look at how that changed. Love was not ready. To quote Kevin Hart, he wasn't ready. Like, now he is.
Yeah, now he is. And they didn't rush him in there. I mean, he did. Remember, he had that start in Kansas City when there was the famous shot of his family being stuck up in the gods at Arrowhead Stadium. And they're like, oh, why do they have those bad seats? Those seats are what they give road teams at Arrowhead Stadium. Okay, that's what they've had for a long, long time. But they were patient, and that's the thing. Whatever the Broncos do this offseason, they need to give themselves the luxury of saying, okay, if a first-round quarterback, if we draft this guy and he's not ready, this can be a red shirt year. And then if you're out of it, maybe those last couple of games, you're giving him the reins to see. That's the Steve McNair plan that the then Oilers had for McNair back in 1995. Gave him the last couple of games in his rookie season, the last couple of games in year 2, and then in year 3 he was ready to roll and went on to a pretty stellar career with the Titans, and then of course with the Ravens at the end.
Right. Do you believe, Mace, that the decision on Russell Wilson, when they make that decision, we all think they're going to likely cut him. But does the decision of eating all of it now or spreading it out over 2 years maybe give you a clue? And again, it'll have to be the right quarterback, whatever. But is that potentially a clue? If they're going to eat it all now, does that mean redshirt year? Or actually, maybe that means play the kid and just kind of struggle and let the kid grow?
Yeah, it might mean that. It also depends how much you're paying that British quarterback. I mean, one of the interesting things, they gave Jarrett Stidham a contract that was 2 years, $10 million, right?
Right.
It's very interesting to look at that in light of the Baker Mayfield deal, which was 1 year, $4 million. And the way they structured it, the cap number for this past year for Baker Mayfield was only $1.7 million. Because what happened was they built void years into it so they could spread out the cap hit over future years, because the Bucs were trying to navigate a huge dead money figure north of $65 million on their cap. So there are ways to structure it, but I think I think we saw enough to where if the Broncos draft a quarterback, I'm not sure Jarrett Stidham is enough of a bridge. I think that may put them into a corner of having to play a young quarterback before he's ready if he is not ready, and that's why. I mean, I think we're going to be talking about some names like like Jimmy Garoppolo, like Jameis Winston. You can just start going down the list of quarterbacks that may be able to that may come in on cheap kind of prove it contracts like Baker Mayfield did, and then you know what? If they look like Mayfield, if they do well, you can ride them for as long as you need to while the young guy develops. And if they don't look good, can they be good enough to at least give you a stable player at the position without having to say, okay, we're putting the rookie in before he's ready. That's the key thing. You just want to give yourself options, right? Some of this is playing CYA, right? Give yourself the option and flexibility to not have to put the rookie in if he's not ready.
Right. Give yourself some options. Brian here in the chat room says, who do you guys think is the best quarterback in the draft for the Broncos? Would you take Bowers at 12 over Penix, Nix, or McCarthy? McCarthy's the type of guy that I would sit for a year.
Yes.
He needs development. I've got a second-round grade on him now. You've asked me, would it be first if it was a year from now? Yeah, it could be, certainly. And I think that's where we have to look, Mace. We have to project these guys, not where they're at now, but where they could be. And that's what makes someone like C.J. Stroud so exciting, because it's like, he's already a star now. What could he be later with more development? I think when we look at Jaden Daniels, when we look at Penix, when we look at Bo Nix, by the way, and I hope Daniels agrees to the Senior Bowl, but we are going to see Michael Penix Jr. and Bo Nix at the Senior Bowl, you and me together. Best coverage right here at denversports.com.
Yeah, we're going to see him firsthand. And the Senior Bowl is always interesting because it's the compare and contrast. The thing is, though, we're going to see them firsthand, but we're also going to see guys like Sam Hartman and Michael Pratt from Tulane firsthand. And oftentimes what happens is when you've got a couple of likely first rounders down there in Mobile, if you see someone like a Pratt come in and do well, all of a sudden it's like, okay, maybe this guy has played his way up too. I remember that happened with Joe Flacco back in 2008 when he came out of Delaware, and he went down there and he balled out and worked his way up. So it's an interesting discussion. Now, one thing about what the Broncos do, it's going to depend what their draft capital is at the end of the day. If they still don't have a second round pick, they may not have the luxury of seeing, okay, does somebody fall to the back end of round one to early in round two? If they have a second round pick, they may be in position to say, all right, let's see if a McCarthy or Penix is sitting there in the late 20s and let's move back up, or even taking them in the second round like the Titans did with Will Levis last year when he fell through the first round.
Right.
But if the Broncos only have that first round pick and they still don't have their next pick until round 3, they'll probably have to go quarterback right then and there at 12.
Yeah, I know Wes here asked in the chat room, when you see him about trading back, getting more picks. Well, here's the thing. This puts you in that Will Levis situation. If you're the Broncos, you just keep moving back. But remember, they got Malik Willis the year before that. So do we really want to be in the Malik Willis, Will Levis? We really don't know if there's any quarterback, or you got none. Or do you want to move up, get the guy, build around the guy? You know what really grinds my gears?
What?
Now, this is not on Tom. Tom is not saying this, but I saw this on Twitter because Chris Harris Jr. responded to a tweet about, like, if Josh Allen was here, the Broncos wouldn't have developed him. And I retweeted what Chris Harris Jr. said. And I said, I agree with Chris. He's right. He would have been more. He would have been the Josh Allen we see today. And I know people say, well, look at what they did. They didn't do Drew Lock. Drew Lock's a second rounder. You get a first round pick. You're moving heaven and earth. You're getting the guy. You're developing the guy. If they move up for a quarterback, they haven't developed a quarterback. No, they'll move heaven and earth to get their guy. And by the way, the Drew Lock stuff, Mace, different ownership. We know the direction of this ownership group. We know the Walton Penner group is here to win and to find that right quarterback for Sean Payton.
Not only that, some of Drew Lock, it's not just people like to blame the teachers, but some of it's on the student as well.
Oh, for sure.
Because respectfully, Drew Lock went out to Seattle and Turned out Geno Smith was better than people thought, but he still couldn't beat out Geno Smith for a starting job, right?
It's true.
And the performance that he had in December that left everyone buzzing a little bit, that was against an Eagles team that turned out was an absolute free fall.
Free fall.
I guess what I'm saying is that even that looks a little bit different. But that's people are so quick to blame the teachers when sometimes it's not solely on the teachers, it's also on the pupil. I think with Drew Lock, it's a little bit of both. The other thing, like you said, heaven and earth, if you move up to get a player, that means all your resources are going into that. I'll say this with Josh Allen. Would the Broncos have developed him very well if they picked him in 2018? Absolutely they would have. You know why? Because if it wasn't going the way they wanted in 2018, with him learning behind Case Keenum, I imagine that Allen might not have come in until the 16th game because Case Keenum stayed healthy that year.
Right.
And Case Keenum is a perfectly cromulent bridge quarterback. If it was not going as they had hoped and they still made a coaching change after 2018, then that head coach would have been hired primarily on the ability to develop and maximize Josh Allen. So I highly doubt it would have been Vic Fangio. My bet is it would have been Zach Taylor, who also interviewed for the job. He went to Cincinnati when Andy Dalton was getting towards the end of his time there. I imagine if given the choice between Cincinnati and Denver having Josh Allen in this alternate history, Zach Taylor would have been the Broncos head coach and would have developed Josh Allen very well, as we've seen with his development of not only Joe Burrow, but what he got out of Jake Browning, who not too long ago was a practice squad quarterback and looked pretty effective down the stretch for the Bengals this year.
Exactly. And that's the thing with the Broncos is you need a starter, you need a backup that you can trust more so than Jarrett Stidham. And that's why the quarterback conversation, it just won't go away. But Mace, that's what this league is built on. The one thing I took away from the playoffs is that there's a lot of bad football and there's a lot of quarterbacks that aren't getting it done. I mean, the Browns were relying on Joe Flacco. And I know it was unconscious for a little bit, but then he turned into Joe Flacco. The Steelers were relying on Mason Rudolph, who I know was better than Kenny Pickett, who's not good, but he became Mason Rudolph. Like at the end of the day, you can't rely on it. Baker's a different story. Baker was the number one overall pick.
Number one overall. And that's an interesting point. We have
different story.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you're the Broncos, if you get the guy and you make the dance, now you can go places. You can be a season like Houston, and you could do it faster than people think. People throwing around this dead cap stuff, like they could get back faster than you think.
Yeah, and it's funny, like you mentioned Baker Mayfield, and he's a former number one overall pick for a reason. And oh, by the way, now here, 6 years into his career, he's already led two different teams to the playoffs. In the case of the Browns, their only playoff win since New Year's Day 1995. In the case of the Bucs, going to a team that had the worst dead cap situation in the NFL, coming off of Tom Brady. They went 8-9 with Tom Brady. So they lose Tom Brady. They're actually a better team with Baker Mayfield coming in. Why? Because there's a reason why he went number one overall. He's got the talent. And we're looking at these quarterbacks in this round coming up here, in the quarterfinals, the divisional round, right? And I'm looking around, I'm seeing Baker Mayfield, number one overall. Jared Goff, number one overall. CJ Stroud, number two overall. Josh Allen, I believe he was number seven. Yes. Yep. Patrick Mahomes, was he number 10? Yes. Right? And then you have Jordan Love, 26 overall, late first round. Lamar Jackson, 32 overall, late first round. Brock Purdy, 7th round pick. Okay? Don't come to me with this, oh, you can find a guy in the 7th round. The odds are so much better if you do it early. Is it a sure thing? No, because there are failures at the top, but the failure rate up top is far less than the failure rate down in the 7th round. I mean, look at the 7th round, for example. After Brock Purdy, you know who probably the next most successful 7th round pick of the last decade at QB is? Trevor Siemian. Okay?
Yeah.
There's There's a lot of rabble to get through to the Brock Purdy. You got Tom Brady at pick 199. Yeah, there are a lot of Spurgeon wins down there, right? There are a lot of Tom Brandstaters down there. I'm just go down the list. You gotta play the odds here. The odds are better if you do it early in the first round. And the one thing the Broncos haven't tried since Super Bowl 50 is a top half of the first round pick on a quarterback. Personally, I think it's time.
I think it's time. I think they need to move up to do it. And my final point, you know what my hot take of today is, Mace? And you know I hate hot takes, but I'm going to tell you this anyway. I just said it on the drive. If Sam Darnold was a quarterback, they'd be doing the same thing. And by the way, Sam Darnold, what, number 2 overall, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or so number 3. Number three, right? Because 2 was
the Giants, Saquon, yep.
Yeah, so number 3 overall back. So if it was Sam Darnold in, all due respect to Brock Purdy, who we love, we'd have all first-round quarterbacks.
Mm-hmm.
We know what the plan should be for this team, Mace. Let's see. I believe we are going to see the next Broncos quarterback at the Senior Bowl. We'll see if that plays out.
Well, and it's interesting that you bring up Sam Darnold because Sam Darnold might be a perfectly viable bridge. Not the guy, bridge.
Yep, he's the Baker Mayfield. That's exactly the type of player you need if you're going to go out there. To me, it's not Jimmy. To me, it's not Jameis. A guy like that, though, would make some sense.
You know what's interesting about Sam Darnold? If he could play against the Broncos all the time, he would have had a great career. Because he played against the Broncos in 2018, 2020, and 2022. 2 wins for his teams against 1 loss. All 3 of those games, he played really well. Remember, in the game that the Jets lost in 2020 in the COVID year, remember he took off like they blitzed, he took off, had the touchdown run, eluded a couple of guys. 2018, the Jets ran in through all over the Broncos. It was a monster rushing day for the Jets, but Sam Darnold was beating Bradley Roby over the top down the sideline. And then in 2022, was hitting DJ Moore, beating Pat Surtain. Not a great day for Pat Surtain. There aren't many bad days for him, but that was one of them.
Right.
And leading a very balanced offense to a very comfortable Carolina Panthers win. Is he as consistent as you'd like? No. Is he a Briggs? Yes. Look, if you told me Sam Darnold plus a round 1 quarterback, I would be perfectly fine with that. If it's Sam Darnold and there isn't a round 1 quarterback, okay, that's where there's a little bit more of an issue there, right? It would Sam Darnold without a round 1 quarterback would be like Case Keenum without drafting a quarterback in 2018, and of course you could have had Josh Allen, right? Case Keenum was a perfectly viable bridge, but the Broncos didn't see him that way, and they made the decision that they made. You got to overcommit to quarterback, and I know this team has a lot of needs, but you've got to overcommit to quarterback. You can stay the course with the offensive line, keep most of that together. You're probably going to move on from Lloyd Cushenberry, but you can bring Garett Bolles back on the right kind of deal, get him an extension, and you can work around the rest of it. It's something I've been saying a lot lately. Your offensive line was 3rd in run block win rate, 8th in pass block win rate. Okay.
Yep.
You've got it. In other words, you've got a line that's doing some good things. That's a really good start. It's going to help the skill position players out. And if you get a quarterback, whether it's through the draft or a bridge quarterback or both, who can do the rhythm and timing things that Sean Payton wants to do and keep this offense on schedule, you have something that can work. We saw it in New Orleans. We've seen it with Teddy Bridgewater running that offense. We've seen it with Jameis Winston running that offense. We saw it for a minute with Trevor Siemian running that offense in 2021. Rhythm and timing quarterback that can get the ball out on time, you can get results.
Your offensive line is not the problem, people. We'll break that down and more coming up on Orange and Blue today. Mace, I'm going to tease something for tomorrow. Do you know what it is?
Tell me.
It is your latest at denversports.com, because not only is the offensive line not a problem, you and I have to get into this dead cap situation, potential dead cap situation. I'm teasing that for tomorrow's show on Wednesday, Orange and Blue today, because the dead cap, which could be there, may not be as big of a problem as you think.
Yep. I'm going to say this right now, and I will say it again tomorrow. Dead money is not an excuse.
That's a wrap for today's program. He's Andrew Mason. You follow him on the socials at Mace Denver. I'm at Cecil Lammey saying OBT is a BFD. Many thanks behind the scenes to Matthew and Joey. Shout out Joey on this show. He's Mace. I'm Cease. We appreciate you. Stay tuned. And as always, please Stay frosty.